Okay, in this tutorial we'll be discussing file formats. Nothing too rocket science as far as software goes, or the learning of it at least. I'm currently in Adobe Bridge, which is part of the Adobe Creative Suite package. Adobe Bridge is basically a file management software. Allows you to set or label metadata, view files. As you can see, these are DNG files. It's basically Adobe's native format for a negative file. So although your camera might push out a CR file for a Canon RAW file, or a NEF for a Nikon RAW file, or I think it's an NEF file, each brand of camera has their own format for RAW files. And what Photoshop has tried to do, or at least Adobe has tried to do, is create a file format that is going to be universal in time to come. Your other CR files, you get a CR2 file. So as the brand cameras evolve, so do their formats. And so you might end up with a file that's obsolete in the sense it can't be opened by modern software. It's an older version. And so in order to combat this, Adobe's now created their own native RAW file in the sense of a digital negative, which is what DNG stands for. So the plus of this as well is with, well, I don't know how many of you shoot with RAW files, but I've noticed with my CR2 files, my Canon camera, the moment I open them and adjust that RAW file in whatever software you're using, it creates like a sidecar file called an XMP file, I think it is, and that tends to just add up more space and take, I don't know, you got a whole bunch of these funny little XMP files floating around alongside of a CR2 file, and it's quite an annoyance. Whereas the DNG file embeds that file into itself, so it's only one file and it's smaller than the Canon's native file. So you save space in your hard drive by immediately saving that. With Adobe Bridge, you have that option to convert the moment you download it off your camera. I'm just opening my Canon downloader software, my photo downloader software. This is the window for the Bridge file. There's a little box that says convert to DNG. This is what I leave on permanently. As I download from my camera, it takes that RAW file, converts it to DNG file, and it saves it onto my hard drive. So it's all done in one step. It takes a little bit longer to do, but you don't have all these extra CR2 files floating around after you've done the conversion. It is an XMP file. This is the XMP, or the sidecar file that's associated to the CR2 file. If I click that off, it'll likely give me that option to switch on as well. But I'd recommend using the Adobe's DNG file. I find it very, very useful. The benefit of using RAW files over JPEGs, as I illustrated with the histogram, you make adjustments. Let me just open this up in Adobe RAW, which is the Adobe's version of RAW file editing software. So with Adobe RAW, I can then make adjustments to my digital negative without damaging the image itself. Okay, this is Adobe RAW. It has all my windows for editing my file. Gives me my EXIF data, shot at the f4, 180th of a second, ISO 100 with a 50mm lens. So all my data with regards to my shoot are listed here as well. If you look at the histogram, it's nice and smooth, there's no breaks in it. I can increase the exposure, I can reduce the exposure, and all the time, even though the image looks bad, the histogram still is nice and smooth and clean. Any changes you make to it, it's not going to really damage the pixels. This is the safest place to do your editing. So whatever changes you make, the nice thing about RAW files as well is the data is hidden in there. You know, even though it's not like with in Photoshop itself, if you up the brightness, you get blank patches where there's no data left. You can actually, if you've shot it overexposed, you can actually recover some of that, so you can pull back some of the highlights. You'll see it brings in the highlights again. Equally with the shadows, if it's a very contrasty image, you can just add a bit of light to the shadow areas, so it adds full light, almost like using a full flash. And then you can just bring in a bit of the black again into that area, so you can really, your ability to adjust your image without damaging it is so much more extensive using raw files. So I would recommend, like I say, unless you're doing a shoot, event shoot, where you're churning out pictures as you shoot them, I would recommend shooting in RAW. It's just your adjustment abilities are so much better for editing purposes. You have the same effects or similar effects to Photoshop. You can do your basic effects, adding this vignette around the edge of the photograph. You can take it down, add a white vignette, whatever your flavor is, and you can change your priority to color priority. This is the blending mode versus paint overlay, more subtle. So this, you have your lens distortions. So if you're shooting with a wide angle lens, you can actually load up profile and to correct the edge, and you can actually see a slight variation there. Turn this on and off, even though it's a 50mm and your distortion is minimal. If you look towards the edges here, it corrects that for you, because it knows exactly what lens is used. It uses the profile related to that lens. This is also a very useful function for correcting distortion. Split toning. This is a very unique, they call it cross-processing. This is where you'd basically do cross-processing, where you're using one color for your highlights versus a second color for your shadows. So you can get red in the shadows and blue in the highlights. It's a look that can be very effective, called cross-processing. If you Google cross-processing, you'll find quite a bit on this style of processing. It gives a nice, unique look to it. This is once again hue, saturation, luminance, all relative to Photoshop. Same procedures. Saturations increasing the intensity of the color, hues altering the color to various spectrums, so changing your orange to more red or more orange, yellows to more orange or more green. So it's just subtle changes within the color itself. Luminance, exactly what I was saying, it's going to basically make the reds pop more or recede more as you adjust the luminance levels. You can also convert to grayscale here, and then just like in Photoshop, you affect the same. Showing now as color because of this split processing here. Just take the saturation back down to 0, and you'll have those colors. You can see now as a black and white, it's very washed out, so you can increase the shadow areas, make them darker. You got preferences as well. So as depending on what the colors are, you wouldn't want to darken them, but maybe enhance them. Darken your blues a bit, so you can make it a bit more contrasty. Also by selecting specific colors related to that. This is your sharpening. Sharpening I always find very useful. As a standard, I like to put a bit of noise reduction in, even though this is shot at 100 ISO. You can view this now at 100%. It is quite smooth and clean, but I like to put a bit of noise reduction in anyway, just to give it that added bit of, because usually your last step in Photoshop would be sharpening anyway. So if I reset this down to what it should be, you can see a little bit of noise there. If you're shooting on 100 ISO, but anything between 15 and 30, normally about 15 is more than enough. I wouldn't get too much more than 30. And the sliders that I would affect would be the luminance contrast, and the color. This color in the shadow areas. Let me see if I can find a spot of this image. that's dark, especially where you've had a really dark area and you've boosted the light, the fill there. For example, this area here, it was quite a dark area anyway. If I up the fill there, you'll see it becomes very grainy, and you almost get, just zoom in a bit more here, you almost get like multicolored pixels there, little red, green and blue pixels showing up in areas like that. Then this is where the color reduction, noise reduction really comes into play. You can see it more effectively as I take it down. You can see a little red in the shadow areas. You notice it most noticeably. So this color slider here would affect that they're really smoothing out that part of it. Bringing this back down again. So yeah, like I say, even though I shot at 100 ISO, it is smooth. I just like, it's just a personal preference. I like to add just a little bit of noise reduction into it, just to really give it that nice smooth finish. Like I say, I wouldn't usually take it more than 30 on all those, and you can always sharpen it up again later. And that's basically all that I use in RAW. A really important part of this is the format. To change your this is where you set your white balance. If you shot wrong, you can adjust it and change it to the correct white balance. At the same time, you can fine tune your balance, your warmth here. You can cool it down a bit. So that's where you would adjust that. So yeah, you can make your picture slightly warmer. You can change that warmth even more fractionally by adding a little bit of more red or a little bit more green to it. So depending on what your preference is, you can really change subtle changes to your color preferences. So I'll change it back to a shot. I think I did bring cooler down a bit. I just preferred the cooler look to it. That was the color settings. So that's pretty much all there is to RAW editing. From RAW here, you can actually save this in various different formats. You can save it straight to JPEG if you wanted to. If you download it as a CR2 file, you can then save it as a digital negative file, PSD, that kind of thing. So this is where your changes happen. I don't want to save these changes, so I'm just going to cancel. I'll revert back to this original thing here. So once, let me open this up. Once I've done my changes into on this raw file, I can then open it. So file open, it will then open it into Photoshop as I guess a layer, which you can then save as a JPEG or a TIFF or whichever. As far as JPEGs, TIFFs and PSDs go, JPEG is your compressed file format, it's your smallest file format. TIFF is basically a flattened image, but I guess it would be a flattened, uncompressed image. Your PSD would be your layer file, and generally is your bigger file of any of the three options. So if you're going to be emailing this, I recommend being RGB versus CMYK. CMYK is significantly bigger than RGB. If you look at your document size down here, it's showing 51 megs, and that's a RGB file, 8-bit RGB file. If I go to image and the same mode, I can change it to 16-bit. If I change this to 16-bit, you'll see that file size here double. It'll suddenly be a 100 meg file. As I explained earlier, the 16-bit just has less damage to pixels when you're editing. So it's a better file, although it's bigger and use a lot more memory. It's perhaps a better format or size to edit in. Your CMYK, once again, is bigger than RGB. Watch the file size again. If I change to CMYK, you'll watch this file size here, it'll increase again. So CMYK isn't your smallest format to save in, and it's also the least favorite for editing. It's got jumped up to 135 from 100 megs to 135 megs. But being CMYK, you can't print in RGB. RGB is colors of light, and is represented by your monitor, basically your monitor, TV, that kind of thing. whereas CMYK are colors of pigment. You can't print in RGB, even though your desktop printer, your inkjet printer says it's RGB. It's actually just cyan, magenta, and black or yellow. It's usually cyan, magenta, yellow that's in there. So you can't print in colors of light. So for your final output, you'd have to convert it to CMYK. But for the sake of storage and saving space, I'd work in RGB. Also for editing, if you go up to your menus here, a lot of the options you would have are grayed out in CMYK. You wouldn't be able to use them. Also, let me change this to RGB again. So for editing purposes and effects, RGB is the best format to have it in. It's just easier to edit. You have more options. If I go back to filter here, I think it's also the 16-bit, maybe a bit of an issue for it. Yeah, so I generally use 8-bit RGB because most of my pixel editing stuff is done in RAW, so from here it's just retouching rather than anything else. Yeah, 8-bit, all your options are available. So 8-bit RGB, you have the most options for effects and that kind of thing. As an illustration, I'd like to show you a file that's with a JPEG. It's best not to save. If you want to keep a file as an original, I'd save the original as a TIFF, and then if you make variations to that as final documents, save it as a JPEG. If you're going to be opening that JPEG and resaving it and opening it and resaving it as different styles or formats or editing versions, it's just that quality is going to deteriorate. It sounds impossible, but let me open up two files for you quickly. Just as an example, check out the sizes of these files in comparison to each other. This is a JPEG file, a CMYK JPEG file, 2.8 megs. The exact same file, RGB JPEG, 1.5, so it's almost half the size of the CMYK JPEG. So that's why RGB JPEGs are the best for emailing purposes. Comparatively speaking, JPEG 2.8, PSD 118 megs, and TIFF 72 megs. So TIFF is significantly bigger than a JPEG. But the way you save it as well, if I say this as a JPEG, stick it on my desktop again, it's going to give me a compression value. This compression value, if you're looking to use it for printing, I wouldn't go below 8, preferably even 10. This is 8 is the lowest high quality setting. 10 is the lowest maximum high quality setting. Anything lower than that, it's going to really compress your file so badly that you'll begin to see pixelization pieces around it. Let me open a file to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is a file that I've used over and over and over again. Let me just get my desktop. Basically, it's a JPEG that I opened, saved, opened, saved, opened, saved, and so I just kept reopening the same file and saving over it numerous times to give you an example of what happens to a file that's repeatedly saved over and over again. So this is basically a file that's been damaged just by being compressed and compressed and compressed. Okay, as I look at it like this, you think, okay, well, it looks the same as any other picture that I've opened up. Let me open the original. Okay. Both JPEGs, this one's only been saved once, this has been saved numerous times as a JPEG. So I'm going to open that up. And we'll put them right next to each other. Okay, let's go to the view menu. Sorry, window, and we're going to cascade. Photoshop files change their viewing abilities here. There we go. I'm going to view them next to each other. And I'm going to zoom in to 100%. So on this one, let's go down here to this view menu here and do 100%. And the same on this window here, we'll make it 100%. Okay, it still doesn't look like it's much, you don't really notice it that much. But look at the differences on that. Let's hide all the tabs, so you've got more space. Okay, on the right hand side is the file that's been saved over and over again. Look at the pixels on this file comparative to the original JPEG. Being a JPEG, you can still see, if I zoom in a little bit more on this one, you can still see a little bit of the effects. These funny squiggles here, those are bad pixels. If I open up a TIFF next to this, you'll see that the quality is even better on the TIFF. Okay, getting back to 100% again. Well, this is not 200%, let's zoom out of it. Even at 200%. Let's get this other one in here. Okay, so JPEG versus TIFF. It's not 200%. There you can see the difference. Even though this has only been saved once, look at the pixelization or the pixel damage on the JPEG versus the TIFF. The TIFF is still very good quality. So if you're going to be saving a file to use as an original source, I'd save it as a TIFF somewhere that you can draw from and open and re-edit and save as something else again. Don't ever save over your originals, even though it is a JPEG, because you have this damage to your files. So that's basically a JPEG undamaged, so to speak, and this is a JPEG really damaged. At 200%, it looks awful. It really is scary. So those are your different file formats and the recommended saving styles. Your number one is RGB TIFF. The second option is JPEG, but only just don't resave over it. And that's about it. As far as Photoshop goes, file save as, and you have your selection of various outputs you can save as. You can even save as a PDF here as well, if that's your option. Not too sure why you would want to do that. Maybe if you're sending to someone who has only a PDF reader, they can open your image as a PDF. If you have been working on a document, saving it as a Photoshop RAW, it isn't really a true RAW file. You're still going to get damage to it. Let me open a RAW file using Adobe Bridge, opening it to RAW. So I'll open up a JPEG here, and if I can right click on it, and I can start open in Camera Raw. So although it's opening it in a RAW file editor, if I make any adjustments to it, you can see the histogram gets very jagged. It's not a healthy looking histogram. So I can make similar type adjustments, but it's going to affect the histogram. It's not going to be as smooth as the original. Let me open this in Photoshop. I will compare this histogram. I'll just tab that. Info, here's my histogram. Look how jagged that is. Here's the original file. It's a lot more smoother. It's just not going to be the same. I mean, you can open your JPEG in your RAW file editor, but it's not going to be the same as a RAW file exactly. And that's file formats. Yeah, there's no do's and don'ts. It's just preferences, and like I say, my preferences are try and keep the original file as clean and pure as possible, especially if you're going to be opening it and using it for other sources later on.